Hiya, so it's important that we just go back through this really small aspect of statistical testing. I think when I originally taught you statistical testing, if you remember, I was using somebody else's resources initially. I was using somebody else's PowerPoint, and the lesson was a little bit kind of skew-whiffy. And now obviously we've got that next CEDA coming up and there is something on this material. So it's important that I just address that now and make sure that I have kind of gone through those little aspects with you. So in this very short video clip, there's going to be some content on why we use the baseline significance level in psychology. Based on what I have taught you, and you've done really well with this bit of statistical testing so far, you should already know that baseline significance is p is equal to or less than 0.05, and you should know that that kind of translates as us as researchers being willing to accept the likelihood that 5% chance factors have potentially had an effect on the outcome of our study. However, I've never actually explained to you why we use that baseline significance level. So we're going to look at that in this short video clip, but we're also going to concentrate on under what circumstances might a researcher choose to use an alternate significance level. So that's where we're going to start. It might be an idea just to have Research Methods Booklet 1 open and available to you so that you can highlight some of the concepts as we go through. So this would be located in the section where I'd originally introduced probability, significance and significance levels to you. So you might just want to pause this and get your booklets available. So we're going to start on that section that I've just mentioned there, that sometimes in psychology we do use alternative significance levels because in certain circumstances we need to be more confident in the outcomes of our research. So in those circumstances we would need to be more stringent with ourselves. We'd need to be more strict in terms of the level of chance that we would be willing to accept. So I've said here, can you think off the top of your head of any situations or occasions where we would need to be more confident? All right, so under what sets of circumstances do you think a researcher would need to eliminate more chance factors? So stringent or more strict significance more strict or stringent significance levels are utilised in psychology on a number of different occasions. Predominantly they are used when we are replicating findings. So traditionally when you first conduct a piece of research, you would go with a baseline level of significance or maybe even one of the more lenient levels of significance. As you replicate it, as you go through the different replications, you would typically get more and more stringent as you go along. As you get more confident in the outcome, you can try and eliminate as much chance from your findings as absolutely possible. So when you're replicating findings, you should be using really a more stringent significance level. The other set of circumstances whereby we would need to be way more stringent with ourselves than 5% is when there are dangerous implications. So this is often the case in health research. For example, drugs testing, so introducing new maybe antipsychotic or antidepressant drugs to market, psychologists would have to use a much more stringent significance level. Testing the effects of alcohol would also be another one. Anything health related, so a lot of stress research would use more stringent significance levels. So let's just take a look at what some of those other significance levels actually look like. So if we look in that left hand column, we've got p is equal to or less than 0.005, p is equal to or less than 0.10, p is equal to or less than 0.01, and p is equal to or less than 0.001. You should be able to see from that 3 of those alternate significance levels are more stringent or more strict than 0.05. Okay, so 0.05 level gives us a 5% risk of chance factors. If we take a look at the first significance level that I've posed to you there, P is equal to or less than 0.005, that means that we would have a 99.5% confidence in our outcome, and we are only willing to accept 0.5% chance, or risk of chance factors rather. If we look at the bottom one, it's even more stringent. So on that occasion, we have got 99.9% confidence in our outcome, and we are only willing to accept, therefore, 0.1% risk of chance factors. So that top and bottom are way more stringent, and they would usually be used in the health field. One of those significance levels, 0.10, is more lenient, okay? So that would be used maybe when it's the first piece of research that's being conducted in an area where you're not confident in the outcomes. Normally, a more lenient significance level is also utilised with a non-directional hypothesis, where you genuinely don't know the outcome. So that's just familiarising yourself with some alternate significance levels, okay? And under what circumstances we would traditionally use them. Now, the other thing that we need to refer to as to why we traditionally use baseline levels of significance in psychology is this. The reason why a psychologist would typically opt for baseline is because it balances out the risk of making what we call in psychology or in any sort of research, it balances the risk of making a type 1 or a type 2 error, okay? So, if you are utilising a more lenient significance level, you have got a greater risk of having made a type 1 error. In other words, you are at a greater risk or vulnerability of making a false positive judgment in terms of your results. If you have made a type 1 error, a false positive error, you have failed to remove enough chance from your research, and what you are likely to have done is wrongly accepted your alternate or your experimental / correlational hypothesis, when in actual fact you should have really accepted your null. You have made a false positive judgment of your work. You are accepting your alternate hypothesis when in actual fact there is way too much chance at play, and you should have accepted your null. If you use one of the more stringent significance levels, then you are putting yourself in a vulnerable position to have made a false negative error. Now, this is known as a type 2, where you have been too harsh with your significance level, you have been too strict in terms of how much chance you are trying to eliminate, and therefore you've made a false negative. You have wrongfully accepted your null hypothesis, when in actual fact you've probably eliminated enough chance factor from your outcomes to actually go ahead and accept your alternate hypothesis. So by using a 0.05, it sticks in the middle of that weighing scale, and it balances out the potential risk of having made a type 1 too lenient or a type 2 too stringent. So it sits firmly in the middle of them. Now, the typical exam style questions that you would get in relation to this are as follows. So I've just pinched these from Exam Pro. First question says, explain why the researcher would decide to use a 5% level of significance rather than a 1% level of significance. So that particular style of question, you would probably be able to say, because it's balancing the risk of having made a type 1 or a type 2 error. It would reduce the risk of making a type 1 error to 5%, for example. You could also say on that particular question, so option F, that unless the research is related in some way to the health field, then there is no real reason to use a more stringent significance level such as the 1%. So baseline would be traditionally acceptable in those circumstances. The second part of the traditional exam questions, option G, he says explain what is meant by a type 2 error. and you've got to do it in the context of the study. So that is referring to the information that I was previously referring to on the last slide. You would need to actually explain what that type of statistical error is. So remember, a type 2 error, which is what was in that question that we've just had up there, a type 2 error is a false negative, okay? So you're wrongly accepting your null where you've been too stringent with yourself. Now, always think of this as a type 2 error because it is the less commonly occurring statistical error, okay? Type 1s happen all of the time. Researchers are too lenient with themselves. Type 2 are the less commonly occurring one. They only happen where really stringent levels of significance have been applied. So that exam question that we've just had up there, we're saying why are they likely to have made a type 2 error, or what is the risk of type 2 error in the context of that study. We're saying that they may have potentially have applied a too stringent significance level, and therefore maybe they've accepted their null hypothesis when in actual fact they could have probably accepted their alternate. The type 1 statistical error, like I said, is commonly made in psychology. A false positive. You basically interpreting the outcomes of your data way more favourably than what you should have done. You have probably been too lenient with yourself. You believe that your results are significant. You've wrongly accepted your alternate hypothesis, and when you should really have been accepting your null. Now, just to point out to you, because this is a common exam question as well, the likelihood or the risk of having made a type 1 error is always the same as the chosen significance level, because that is the type 1 error. A type 1 error is not eliminating enough chance from your research. So if you ever get a question where it's asking you to work out the likelihood of the researcher having made a type 1 error, the answer is already given to you, because it is always the same as the significance level that's being assigned. Traditionally, remember, that's baseline. So usually when they've asked you that kind of question, you would be able to confidently say the risk of having made a type 1 error would be 5% if baseline has been used. So that is just a short video going back through those different significance levels and when they would traditionally be used, and what we mean by a type 1 false positive, too lenient, and what we mean by a type 2 false negative, too stringent statistical error, and the fact that baseline sits between the risk of those two statistical errors. And that ultimately, guys, is why we always opt for baseline.